Today, I thought we could talk about something popular and completely uncontroversial. Taxes. No, don't skip to another video. Today, we're going to be looking specifically at transportation and infrastructure taxes and how they relate to electric vehicles. And look, I know this is a touchy subject because no one ever cares what I tweet. And yet I ended up in an argument with a former congressional candidate on Twitter about this subject, which is pretty much unheard of for someone with all of 400 followers. Oh, and by the way, I like having 400 followers. Please don't follow me on Twitter. So recently there's been a flurry of breathless commentary about how battery electric vehicles, particularly large, heavy EVs like the Hummer, will lead to the complete and total destruction of all infrastructure through a combination of damage caused by their weight and loss of income from the disappearance of gas taxes. This position, at least in part, stems from fossil fuel talking points and misinformation. It's been used for some time to push for punitive taxes on electric vehicles, and partly they stem from an increasingly divorced from reality position of EV owners all being fantastically wealthy. In Australia, we've seen this in the form of Victoria's notorious push for incredibly high per kilometre fees for electric vehicles, and in the US we have seen it as many individual states have passed additional licensing fees, both for hybrid and electric vehicles, in an attempt to offset the revenue loss caused by EVs not paying gas taxes at the pump. What's particularly interesting about this is we're seeing this discussion gain momentum while EVs still make up less than 3% of global vehicle market share. Were I feeling uncharitable, I'd say that this sudden frantic terror about how we pay for infrastructure might be related to the increased interest in EVs, the market entrance of real non-compliance car EVs from major automakers, and fossil fuel companies seeing the writing on the wall and trying to eke out the last bit of life from a dying business model. But obviously, I wouldn't say that. And to leave it at that does not address the very real question of how we should pay for infrastructure going forward, which is, to be fair, a very important question. The first step in answering that question is, how do we pay for them now? Well, in the US, to an extent, the answer is, we don't. As has been very nicely demonstrated in Tennessee with the closure of the bridge in Memphis after the failure of a structural member. The US has been underfunding transportation infrastructure for a very long time. And that's in part because gas taxes have been inadequate to cover maintenance and development for quite a while. And because what people often think of as road taxes, i.e. taxes from gas, tyres and licensing, actually don't all go to funding roads, or even necessarily to infrastructure. Take the tax in Victoria. The state government opined that the tax was necessary because fuel duty isn't charged to EVs, and that therefore infrastructure would suffer. However, in Victoria, fuel duty goes into the general pot of money from all taxes, and then some of that is allocated back to infrastructure. The same is true for fuel duty in the UK. It just plops into the country's piggy bank and is then dished out as required to whatever the government is prioritising. Perhaps redecorating Boris's flat in a Rococo hellscape theme, for example. In the US, while in every state some of the money from gas taxes does go to pay for roads, it also pays for other things. Most commonly, and making the most sense, gas taxes also pay in part for public transportation. Since the US desperately needs modernisation and expansion of its public transportation system, it's unsurprising that this transport-related income has been tapped as a source for the traditionally underfunded public transportation system. Indeed, as we boldly go into our cleaner, greener future, we need public transportation to make up a much larger proportion of the way we move people and things around. So investing in this now would be a great idea. However, gas taxes also pay for law enforcement. Colorado is a bit of an outlier here, but it devotes more than 10% of its gas taxes to enforcement, and other outliers include Texas, which spends more than a quarter of its gas taxes on education. So across the US and in most of the world, it's not a case of drawing a straight line from gas taxes to shiny new tarmac. Coming back to the US, and I know this will astonish you all, there's a federal chunk and a state chunk. And that state chunk, it really varies by state. And it's also complicated by the fact that maintenance tends to be done by the state, but new infrastructure can come either from the state or the federal pot, and that the federal pot, that cash, that comes from a dedicated user-funded source, the Highway Trust Fund. That fund's primary source is gasoline taxation. The challenge here is that the federal gas tax has not been raised since 1993, which has led to the dual problems of the actual amount of money collected per user decreasing because of increasing fuel efficiency, and the value of the smaller amount of cash being collected per user also decreasing because of the effects of inflation. At the state level, that has sometimes been counteracted by state increases in taxation. In around 19 states, gas tax automatically adjusts either with inflation or with gasoline prices. And so, the end result of this complex mishmash of state-by-state rules and the Highway Trust Fund's perpetual near-bankruptcy situation is that, in Alaska, just 6.9% of road and infrastructure spending comes from gasoline and license taxes, but in Hawaii, it's over 70%. And unlike the European model in which CO2 is a primary driver for vehicle taxation, hence the significant incentives for EV ownership in much of Europe, in the US, the only really significant federal tax that related to CO2, the 1978 gas guzzler tax, is only applicable specifically to passenger cars, not to SUVs or trucks, and so fails to capture the very vehicles it should be targeting. That tax has actually been blamed in the past for the substantial rise in popularity of these heavy and heavily polluting vehicles. Another significant factor, and part of the reason I got into that Twitter row, is the criticism that EVs are heavier and thus do more damage. Which is in itself true. A study by the US General Accounting Office showed that the amount of damage caused by a vehicle to the road surface is related to their weight. But it's not a direct relationship, it's actually worse than that. It's a fourth power relationship. So if you're driving a car that weighs 3,000 pounds, say a Chevy Spark EV, you're doing twice to the fourth power, i.e. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, for those of you chatting at the back, that's 16 times as much damage as someone driving a 1960s Austin Mini that weighs 1,500 pounds. Unless, of course, you're doing it in a tunnel under Turin while making off with scads of cash, in which case the amount of damage is measured kind of differently. That fourth power thing, though, that is a problem. But as was also pointed out by the GAO, it's a minute problem when compared to the damage done by a single 18-wheeler. At 20 times the typical weight of a passenger vehicle, electric or not, a single large truck does the amount of damage of about 9,600 cars. Indeed, the GAO report cites heavy and overweight trucks as a massive factor in road deterioration. Okay, so the picture is complicated, a bit varied, and things are a bit of a mess, but to summarise, gas taxes have not, for a long time, entirely gone to directly funding road building or maintenance in many places. And even when they have, they've generally been insufficient to do that by themselves, and the lion's share of physical damage to roads is done by trucks, and unless the Hummer EV is a much more successful vehicle than its gasoline predecessors, which it might be, it's not going to be responsible for the lion's share of road surface deterioration. But whining and saying, "It's not our fault," it really isn't a solution. Is it fair that EVs pay for road usage? Yeah, probably. But to move from EVs paying less than their fair share to paying more than their fair share, while gasoline vehicles are neither paying their fair share of the resources that they're using, nor paying for the health and environmental impact of what they use, is counterproductive and will likely slow uptake of a technology that we desperately need to shift ourselves away from fossil fuel dependence. As it stands, of the states that currently charge EV license fees, nearly half charge more than owners of comparable gas-powered vehicles pay in taxes. And as of last year, of the 12 more states that were considering adding clean vehicle fees, almost all of them expected EV owners to pick up more of the tab than their gas car owning counterparts. It certainly seems like gas car owners are asking us to go Dutch, then dine and dashing. So what should we do about it? Well, one thing that would reduce maintenance cost is shifting a large percentage of freight from road to rail. In addition to being more energy efficient, it also decreases the damage to the roadway that heavy trucks cause. While there will likely be a place for road haulage for a very long time, shifting a big chunk of that long distance haulage off the roads could make a huge difference. Similarly, investing in mass transit and building infrastructure that encourages people to give up their cars because they're just not needed, if you live in a walkable city, owning a car, especially as car sharing becomes more common, may just become an onerous thing that sucks up your time. That is time you could spend laughing while eating salad, or whatever it is that young B-roll city millennials are up to. But both of those help to reduce long-term infrastructure cost. It doesn't help with paying for it right now. Back in 2015, the US Congress passed the Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act. As an aside, do you ever wish they'd spend more time on actually legislating and less time coming up with snappy acronyms? Anyhow, that established a grant to encourage states to explore other ways to fund transportation infrastructure, and states have explored various options. There has been some discussion of increasing the use of toll roads. A challenge with that is that they can drive people who can't afford them off onto smaller roads, potentially clogging up non-arterial back roads with much increased traffic. That in turn worsens in-town pollution and potentially increases the number of accidents. Also, honestly, it basically leads to only well-off people being able to get to work on time, which is pretty counterproductive. Some have suggested that taxing tyres would be one way to effectively produce a use-related taxation system that's motive system agnostic. If you're using more tyres, then you're probably doing more miles or harder miles, or your vehicle is heavier, so you should pay more tax. So goes the argument. However, one critique is this has the potential to encourage people to drive on unsafe, worn-out tyres, which is a pretty fair critique, although there are other valid problems with it, which are mainly the same as the valid problems that come with a lot of usage-related charging. Perhaps the most direct form of usage taxation is per-mile charging. The California Road Charge pilot program included more than 5,000 cars covering over 37 million miles. Many other states have had pilot projects, my own, Washington included. The aim often cited is to roughly equal the per-mile average cost. An argument cited for levelling out the cost is equity. If you can't afford a more efficient car, you're currently paying more to use the same amount of road than someone driving a plug-in hybrid, for example. But it then also doesn't make any allowance for people choosing to buy a more expensive but less fuel-efficient vehicle and the impacts on the environment that that may have. And of course, the biggest equity downer on per-mile charging is that often lower-income people are not able to afford housing near where they work, particularly in cities like Seattle or Boston, where the jobs might be in the centre of the city, but lower income earners have to live on the outskirts. And so they're effectively being taxed extra for not being able to afford to live in the city and having to commute, which is just vacuous. Oh, and for those of you like me worried about privacy implications, in Washington at least, the most recent bill allowed you just to submit your total mileage. You didn't have to have a GPS tracker in your car. I mean, ignoring the fact that you've probably got a cell phone with you and you've handed your tracking data to either Apple or Google or both. Anyway, but at the end of the day, perhaps infrastructure funding should come from general taxation. Maybe it's time to have a sin tax on expensive and large vehicles and just accept that we all use infrastructure. We all benefit from it. So maybe we should all pay for it? I know, it's a wild thought. Tell me I'm wrong. I know some of you will. But then, how do you think we should pay for infrastructure? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, play nice. Oh, and just before I go, one thing I did wonder, how much of this could be offset by no longer subsidising fossil fuels? Well, In 2015, according to the Office of Highway Policy Information, gas taxes in the US raised about $34.6 billion. And according to the IMF, the US spent about $649 billion on fossil fuel subsidies. So cancelling fossil fuel subsidies would give us about $600 billion to pay for, well, things that aren't making the planet uninhabitable. Just saying. That's it for today. Please do hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't, as it stops YouTube from doing weird things with our content. Make sure you're subscribed to Take 2 and Transport Evolved Shorts. There are links below. Thanks on behalf of the entire TE crew go out to the folks on my right for being our $15 to $49 a month patrons. Special thanks to our $50 a month patrons, Guido Grohoa, Brophy Wolf, Anonymous Freak, Regine Fellows, Kyle Hodgson, Gordon C., Paul Conway, Laura Sanborn, Anthony Coates, Denny Hyde, Sean Ueda, and Tesla in the Gong. And our deepest gratitude to our $100 a month Patreon supporters, John Lyons, Marcel Ward, Reggie Watts, JP Fagerback, Will Graylan, and Ian. If you'd like to join the ranks of wonderful supporters, you'll find links below to Patreon, Bitcoin, and Ko-fi. Chat with the team and TE fans over at Discord, and if you'd like to buy some of our TE swag, just head on over to our Redbubble store. Don't forget that we've now got brand new channels for Transport Evolved Shorts. We'll link to it below, and you should totally hit the subscribe and hit the bell right down here, as well as do the exact same for Transport Evolved, Take 2, and Transport Evolved Shorts. Help us grow our other channels, and that means we can make more awesome content and do more awesome things. We just finished a Volkswagen ID4 review, and we did that because of your support. Thanks for joining me, and as always, keep evolving.